Welcome to Baby Boomer Tales. I'm Jim. You can find us at our YouTube channel and our YouTube music page, our Facebook page, our website, babyboomertales.com. Once you've arrived at that website, there is a Boomer's General Store where you can buy t-shirts, ball caps, coffee mugs, all Baby Boomer oriented. You can also find a link at our website that you can buy our book, Got a Job. By purchasing any of these items, it helps support our podcast so we don't have to get a corporate sponsor. Thank you for riding along today. I appreciate it more than you'll ever know. I think I'm losing my identity. This can be part of our monologue, I guess. I've noticed as people grow older, their influence, their ability to have people take what they say seriously, their entire being seems to take a backseat to younger, more with it individuals. This is even the case in family settings so often. I think my identity anymore is this podcast. And I'm not losing that. Where I think I'm losing my identity is who I was for the first 70 years of my life. One time I was identified as my little hometown's first hippie, which I always thought was a misnomer anyway. I like to think that I was identified as a man with strong moral values and very family oriented. A man that loved his wife no matter what and would do anything he could for his children. A man who was tolerant and yet stood up for right from wrong. A man that possibly you would want to be his friend. Maybe that's because as I get older, I become more and more isolated. All this action started to take place around COVID. It coincided with my hearing deteriorating so much that it's hard for me to even converse with my wife a lot of times. I know my children don't call me very often anymore, and that's because it's hard for me to carry on a conversation because I don't know what they're saying, especially my oldest. She speaks rather fast, and I'm always constantly saying, what, huh, pardon me, all that. Sometimes I just guess at what she said, and, of course, when you're guessing what somebody says, you usually guess wrong. So I think, and this is okay, that my identity is now centered around the podcast. The podcast does very well, I do believe. I'm in the top 25% of all podcasts, but there's millions of them out there, so that's not really saying much. I have had to find my center on the podcast as far as around friends and relatives and whatever, that I don't talk about it. I can sit around with people and they talk about their work or what they're into all the time. But once I start talking about the podcast, it's like their eyes glaze over. So I have learned, or I am learning, or I'm trying to learn to leave that alone. Just leave it alone. I don't know. Enough about that. Our song of the week is Moon River, written by Henry Mancini and Johnny Mercer. It was first performed by Audrey Hepburn in the 1961 movie Breakfast at Tiffany's. It won an Oscar for Best Original Song in that movie. Later, in the very next year, it became the theme song for Andy Williams, and he sang the first 8 bars at the beginning of each episode of his television show. Williams never released this song as a single, but it was on his album Moon River and Other Great Movie Themes in 1962. It sold 2 million copies, that album did. We went to Andy Williams' Moon River Theater in Branson, Missouri one time and saw him and Glen Campbell put on a little concert and show. It was great. It was great. Andy was fairly old at the time, but Glen Campbell was a guitar virtuoso. He was great. Waiting around the bend, my huckleberry friend. The most memorable people and places in my life, in no particular order here. I'm going to bounce around between people, places, and things. And if I would do this next week, it'd probably have some different things on it. But let's go here. My home. My home where I live now. I've lived here longer than I've lived any place ever. We've lived here 25 years now. It's gotten to be so much work because of the property and the grounds here that I toy with the idea of maybe selling and moving some place with maintenance-free living, but I don't know. I love it here. I remember old Blue Dog. She was the third dog I ever had, and she lived to be 16 years old, and before I got married to start a family, she was my family. And she has to be my very favorite dog of all time. And definitely the most memorable. Some of the stuff she would do. I remember Terry and playing electric football and all kinds of baseball type things and events with Terry. He was a dear, dear childhood friend. I never classified him as my best friend because I always classified Wayne as that growing up. But Terry was an important part of my life as I was growing up in that little town up in north central Colorado, Rocky Mountains. Terry passed away several years ago. I was fortunate enough to find him again, and we made contact and caught up just a little. Sawmill Gulch. It was a place we used to go when I was a kid. My family would go up there for picnics and stuff. It was north of my hometown towards Wyoming, if you drove towards Wyoming. And you drive back in the mountains on this old logging type road and get back up in there, and it was always fun. Last time I was ever there, Kim was about 9 months pregnant with our oldest daughter. So we decided to go a little four-wheeling, so maybe send her into labor. Well, I'd heard that if you continue on Sawmill Gulch, it puts you out on the south side of that little pass there. And so we decided to do it. And once I got up to the top of that little pass, I realized I really didn't know where I was going, but I followed the road. And what if Kim started labor right now? We were bouncing around pretty good. But we got back to town okay, and a few days later we went to the hospital and had a baby. Adams Falls, the only waterfall I'm aware of up in that country. It's always fun to go up there. Watch water rushing down. Abe Lincoln, a mountain range that looks like old Abe laying there. You can see pictures of him on our website. It is the one iconic thing that every time I go there, I look for that. It's not hard to see. You can see it from all over the place. The Man in the Mountain. Colorado Slim, an old guy that drive his Model T in every parade that they had up there. He was kind of the town character, very lovable guy. Old Doc up in the town that had the hospital and the fair. Most famous man that ever came out of that county, I do believe. Mr. Adams. When I was a boy working at my dad's store, this old man would come along and always talk with me and speak with me, and he'd start bringing me books. He'd catch something I was interested in with our conversation. He'd bring me a book to read, and I'd give it back to him when I was done. He was a foreman up there in the lettuce industry. That country up there was perfect for growing iceberg lettuce. In fact, I made a podcast about it one time called The Iceberg. I guess he is a stern boss, a tough boss. But you know what? He was one of the nicest old men I remember from my childhood. The beach at the lake town, the only place in the whole county you'd ever find sand is there on that beach. Beautiful, beautiful natural lake up there, full of Indian legends. The Pine Cone, which if you just walked up from that beach, right up the hill to the main street of the lake town, you could go in the Pine Cone. The swimming pool over in the county seat town, that's where I learned to swim. Natural hot springs. Going up to the railroad trestles up on the Corona, seeing the glaciers up in there. Going back to the lake town and watching the North Fork of the Colorado River right behind the rapids. The sound was amazing of that water rushing over the rocks. Driving over the Beaver, driving over the Cottonwood. My grandma, she had these flowers outside in the summertime I always called flags. They must have been some form of an iris. The leaves I always thought looked like flags. She also had poppies growing right in there by her house. And it's the only place I ever saw poppies growing, those big orange poppies. She also had clover around her yard. I'd never had clover in my yard when I was a kid. I think my dad would kill the clover, and I loved that clover. Connie and I would always roll around the clover looking for four-leaf clovers. Fireworks at the airport. The whole town would go up the airport on the 4th of July, park on the runway, and the fire department would set off a great fireworks show. Sledding down the hill from my house in town, going down Garnett and turning onto First Street, going probably 50 miles an hour down that hill. That was before the roads were paved, where the snow would melt on these paved roads. But those old gravel dirt roads, it was just a sheet of ice. I remember Barb at the El Grande taking my ticket and serving me Coca-Cola and a fire stick. I remember Bob at the drugstore. He's the one that always told everyone I was the first hippie in town. Ricky at the Columbine with a big old cigar in his mouth, the ashes falling into the food as he cooking. We all knew that that was happening, yet his food was quite delicious. Pete at the Mobile. I remember Carolyn coming over for coffee at our house, drink coffee with my mom. The next day, my mom would go next door to Carolyn's, and they'd drink that coffee and sit and talk, and they had a wonderful friendship. I remember driving up and down Main Street, making U-turns at the end of town, going back down Main Street to the other end of town, making a U-turn again, time after time after time. Chocolate dipped cones at Stella's. I remember that big boat building at Frank's Marina. That whole building just looked like a giant boat, and we'd go up there for Sunday lunch every once in a while in the summer. I'll never forget Dutch, who sold the store to my dad and then worked for my dad all the years. Dad owned that store. One of the most wonderful human beings I've ever known in my life. The fair, up in the same town that Doc lived in, up there in the town with the hospital, the county fair that brought the east end of the county and the west end of the county together. And for a week there, we had no differences. We were all part of the whole there. I remember the burner in town. From the sawmill, they'd burn all the scraps of the wood. Sawmill sat down there close to the river, and it was always smoking. It was the first thing I'd see in the morning when I looked out the window or walked out the door. You could see that burner smoking away. I remember the nice summer days up there. 70 degrees and no humidity whatsoever. Not a cloud in the sky. The nicest summer days on earth are up there. Also being part of my little hometown, an hour and a half from Denver over the mountains. Denver was an important part of living there. You'd have to go to Denver for this or that or the other thing every once in a while. And I remember the Westland Shopping Center back in the days before the malls. And Casa Bonita, the most famous Mexican restaurant north of the border. Going to Bear Stadium that later became Mile High. Elitch Gardens and Lakeside amusement parks. And going to that Golden Dome, the state capitol. Always be kind. It's good for your soul. I'll be back next Wednesday. Peace out.